morning, everyone, and thank you for participating in the Working Groups 2 and 3 meetings as part of the Phase 2 of Transmission Service and Market Scheduling Priorities Initiative. Working Group 2 is focused on transmission products and reservation processes, and Working Group 3 is related to the study process and transmission upgrades. And we'll provide more information in just a couple of slides. This is Christina Osborne with ISO's Stakeholder Engagement Team. I'll be providing support for the meeting. So after I do my introductions, I'm going to turn it over to Milos Pasanik from ISO's policy team. He's going to provide some remarks, and then he'll turn it over to Kathy Anderson and Stephen Longyear from Idaho Power Company, who will share their practices as they relate to these processes. There are several other working group members and ISO representatives who are listed in the panelist window. I'm not going to list all of them, but you can see them logged into WebEx there. We will provide an opportunity for people to ask questions, kind of take pauses throughout, and at that time I'll provide instructions for how to raise your hand. We are going to start with questions from the working group members and the panelists, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the stakeholder participants. We are recording today's meeting, and we will post the video file on the initiative webpage along with the other materials related to this meeting today. These working group meetings these working group discussions are intended to foster open dialogue, sharing of ideas and perspectives, and overall brainstorming on the different topics in the subgroups. These discussions may not be representations of official company perspectives and should not be treated as such in order to foster open dialogue and idea sharing. We did schedule another meeting on February 14th, as you can see at the bottom of this slide. I did send out an invite earlier today. We will post the participation details for that meeting on ISO's public calendar, so look for those soon. We do have a presentation this coming Friday. Salt River Project is planning to share their practices, so also the meeting details for that are on ISO's public calendar. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Milos to start the meeting.
Thank you, Christina, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to a Monday morning meeting, a working group on the transmission service topic. Today we're going to appreciate Kathy Anderson and Stephen making themselves available. Today we're going to hear about Idaho Power's practices on their transmission reservation processes, and this is, these working groups were starting off with discussions and learning about practices from parties across the West. We started with learning about practices from BPA. Today we're going to learn from Idaho Power, next week or later this week from SRP. And then we'll turn into some more robust brainstorming and discussions on how some of these aspects could apply to the ISO as we're looking to develop a transmission reservation process for wheel-throughs to establish scheduling priority. I think what we'll learn today as part of the working group 2 topic from Idaho Power, I think what we're really going to be interested in is the time frames across which reservations can be made under their oath. As well as the process for reserving transmission service, what process they go through to evaluate requests and some of the transparency aspects of that process. And then for Working Group 3 that Stephen is going to walk us through or discuss Idaho Power practices, that's going to be more focused on what's the process for expanding the transmission system in response to requests for transmission service that are of a long-term nature, I think a year or longer. But we'll hear more about some of those practices as we're also considering how the ISO may adopt a approach where parties can request service of a long-term duration, and if an upgrade is needed, what's that study process and ultimately process to getting to the upgrade and integrating with the California ISO's transmission planning process. So really appreciate, again, Kathy and Stephen making themselves available. And if there are any questions, we'll pause at certain points in the presentation, and I encourage everybody to ask if they're curious about any aspects of this presentation. So with that, Kathy, thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. All right, so my part should probably be fairly short. Idaho Power, for the most part, offers the pro forma type of service that's in pro forma. So if you want to go ahead and move to the next slide. For Idaho Power, all transmission service requests are submitted on OASIS. We do have business practices that outline information on how to request transmission service, how to become a customer of Idaho Power, for transmission service, as well as how we evaluate, what are our timelines and conditional natures if you want to compete for transmission service. So there's a whole bunch of business practices that are actually out on our OASIS, and I put this link out there. So for anyone that is interested, feel free to go look at all those business practices as well. The business practices essentially just tell you how we kind of administer our OAT in a little bit more detail. So next. So Idaho Power offers firm point-to-point transmission service. We offer a yearly product, which is 12 months or greater. We offer a monthly firm product, which can be up to 11 continuous months. We offer a weekly firm and a daily firm also. Unlike Bonneville Power, Idaho Power does not have an hourly firm product. So if somebody wants a firm, the lowest amount of time they can buy is a daily. Firm point-to-point service can be redirected as either firm or non-firm, subject to ATC on the redirected path. So that's one of the benefits of firm point-to-point service. So if you bought LeGrand to Bora and you decided you wanted to go Lolo to Bora, you could redirect that either on a firm basis or a non-firm basis, and we'll do an ATC check on that, and if it's available, we do grant that. Non-firm, you can't do that with. So, but those are the service we do. So non-firm, you can go ahead. Non-firm, we do a monthly non-firm. We do actually have a 2-month limit on our non-firm. Weekly non-firm, we have up to 3 continuous weeks. Daily non-firm, up to 5 continuous days. Hourly non-firm, we have at least 1 hour in a single calendar day, up to 72 hours. And part of these limitations that we've put, number one, non-firm just has to do a lot of it with the calculation of the ATC for the monthly. The weekly, it has to do with a billing thing. If you start to head into 4 weeks, right, you're essentially a monthly product. So we just kind of put these limitations around very early on in our OAT business practices, just to try to deal with some weird billing that can occur if you start to do some of this continuous weeks and months and days and things like that. So there's no magic to the 2 months or 3 weeks. Again, it's mostly driven by billing considerations. We also have network or native load service. Network service, you have to have a contract for network integrated transmission service. And in that contract, you identify specific loads and resources that you are going to have subject to the contract. The terms of service vary depending on the customer, but for Idaho Power, all the actual network integration transmission service or NHTSA contracts are all long-term because they're serving a load that's within the balancing authority. And generally, those loads don't go away. So they're all long-term. Some network customers select 5-year terms. Some elect to have their NHTSA be 20 years. Regardless, all those NHTSAs that are 5 years or longer are subject to rollover, just like a point-to-point would. So they can execute those and roll them over. But there's really no term length on that contract. It's just whatever that customer wants to do. We also have native load, of course. That's load service for Idaho Power's retail load. We don't have a specific formal contract with ourselves, but we do require us to abide by the same rules as a network service. So we also have to identify specific resources in order to use the firm network transmission on our system. So in the past, in other meetings, you've probably heard us talk about designated network resources. Both network service and native load service have to utilize both of those to use their network rights. Here's the timing tables that are in our business practice for our firm service. You can see there's really not a no earlier than request, and part of that is because in one of the FERC orders, if you had a no earlier than timeline, you had to have a simultaneous submission window and a methodology of how multiple requests received within that window are treated. And so when that FERC order came out, Idaho Power just removed the earliest request. So if you wanted to really go out and ask for 1 day 3 years from now, you could, and that will be evaluated based on the ATC. So again, yearly is 60 calendar days before the start of service, and the reason that's the latest request is usually yearly takes a study process, and so the likelihood of that getting potentially granted before the study process runs out is probably slim, so we wanted at least 60 days to be able to look at that. The monthly is 5 business days before the start of service. The weekly is, again, the same thing, and then the daily is just 1 business day before the start of service. I will note that for the daily especially, that also kind of falls in line, it's also in accordance with the pre-scheduled calendar, so with how WEC schedules, it may not be exactly 1 business day, but those dailies. The non-firm, we do have earliest request time queues on those. FERC didn't require the same kind of simultaneous submission window on non-firm that they did on firm. So we do have monthly non-firm 60 days, 60 calendar days before the start of service is the earliest, weekly 14 calendar days, daily 2 calendar days. Again, kind of subject also to WEC pre-scheduling calendars. Hourly, that's the earliest request according to the OAT. And then you can also see the latest requests that are in there. The daily, interesting enough, it says 1 minute before the start of service, which is true, but it's still subject to tagging deadlines. So if you buy something at 11:59 or 23:59, if you want to use the other time reference, you're probably not going to be able to tag it for that first hour of it because you're past the T20 timeline, but you can still buy it for the entire day and tag it for later hours. There's really nothing that prohibits that in our OAT or our business practices. So this is how we process transmission service requests. So all long-term requests are basically manually processed, and that's due to the nature of long-term. We have to look at ATC across different constraints and different segments of our system in order to determine what can be granted. So all of those are actually manually processed. You'll submit the request, and it'll just sit in a pending until our analysts start to move it through the process. We do the same thing with monthly firm point-to-point, quite honestly, and part of this is just a carryover because we want to make sure that the ATC that we are looking at against is really calculating correctly. For years ago, we just had an issue sometimes with how that calculated early on in the process. So right now, those are manually processed. Does that mean, a week, 2 weeks from now, we don't change that? No, but for right now, they are manually processed. Weekly, daily, and all non-firm point-to-points are all automatically processed based on the validations that are occurring. One of those validations is ATC. There's several other validations that occur against those reservations, but those are just automatically processed by the system. They are processed in queue order, and if you're interested in processing information, you can find that in our business practice number 9. All our reservations are visible on OASIS for those with a digital certificate. However, for those of you without a digital certificate, if you're curious what our active and pending long-term reservations look like, we do post a spreadsheet out there that just kind of shows that so people get an idea of the longer-term usage of our system, and they don't have to go pay for a digital certificate. If you want to put in a reservation, however, you do got to go buy that digital certificate and become a customer of Idaho Power's transmission. This is just a picture of our OASIS network model. We call this our commercial model, and each of these segments kind of represent pore pod combinations. I don't want to call them flow gates because we don't do flow gates, but there'll be like constraints like the Idaho Northwest Path, which is a group of 230 and a 500 kV line. So this is kind of, each of these segments that you see between these different points represents an ATC check for the most part. Some of them don't have an ATC check, especially if you get in the middle of our system, but some of them do. So this is just if a customer was curious, like, how do I move power from Bonneville to Pacific Corp on their eastern side, they could look at here and you can see our interconnection tie with Bonneville at LeGrand, and you can go over to the eastern side of our system or the right-hand side, and you can see Pace over at Bora area. So this just tells customers what they could go request from a point-to-point perspective. And the colors just are different kinds of lines. Again, here's a link to our business practices if people are interested in seeing more of that or reading more of that. Again, FERC requires us to have business practices posted on OASIS on how we interpret and implement our tariff. I think that might be the last slide.
Yep, that's the last slide.
It's going to be really fast.
No problem. You ready to take questions, Kathy?
Yeah, we can certainly take questions if there are some.
Sure. So let's start with questions from the panelists. I do see Milos, you have your hand raised. Again, I just want to remind people, if you have a question, there's a little hand icon above the chat window. Go ahead and click on that if you're in WebEx. If you dialed into the meeting, you're going to press #2. So let's go ahead and start with Milos and then see if anybody else queues up. So go ahead, Milos.
All right. Good morning. Thanks, Kathy. And hopefully this buys us a little bit of time in case anybody else has other questions. For the firm transmission service that you talked about, you mentioned that you provide long-term, or you offer the ability to reserve long-term service, which is a year or longer, and then short-term, monthly, weekly, and daily, and you don't offer firm hourly service. Now, there are those four types of duration of firm service that you offer. When it comes to kind of curtailment priorities, do they have effectively the same priority or different priorities for curtailment purposes based on duration?
For firm, they're all the same. So if we've sold firm service, whether it's yearly or 1 day, if we had to curtail, those all get curtailed pro rata with what's scheduled there. So, yeah, and it's the same with our network, right? We consider our network that has a designated network resource firm as well. So it would get curtailed along with those other firm uses if needed.
Okay.
So there's not a differential between based on duration.
Okay. Thank you. In terms of the long-term firm process and how you're evaluating requests for service, sounds like it's maybe starting with long-term firm. It sounds like it's a queue-based process that parties queue up, and then you evaluate them on a first-come, first-served basis. And I think you said it's a manual process. Is that just a little bit of insight into that manual process? Is that kind of a spreadsheet-based process, or do you have some other tool behind the scenes? Or when you say manual, it means really it's like Excel or some other, internal manual process.
Okay. Yeah, so it is queued on OASIS, and so manual just means, we'll manually process that. It won't automatically be processed by the system, and the system won't make a determination. When we get one of those long-term requests in, just honestly, Power doesn't really have any long-term transmission across the system. It's pretty much fully subscribed, so that will automatically get somebody kicked into the system impact study phase. So we'll start them in that. We'll have them sign those agreements, and then Stephen and Eric's planning group then starts to do those analysis of what it's going to take to be able to accommodate that request, whether it is a build, whether there is any capacity really there to do it. A lot of customers will ask us to study conditional firm. And so they'll take a look at, I think they have I'll let them speak to it, but I think they have a spreadsheet that they kind of look at that determines the usage of different, what we call paths. Usually the biggest constraint on our system, honestly, is Path 14 or the Idaho Northwest Path. So they know all the reservations across there. They know all the usage across there. and then they'll determine, what can really be accommodated. And out of that study, they'll get some results telling the customer, yeah, we can go ahead and grant this, or no, it's going to take a build, and here's the next step in the process.
Okay, and to the extent that you have ATC, and let's say you go through this manual process and there is ATC, does it after you do that ATC evaluation and you have it, do you nevertheless does planning play a role in that process, or is it simply an ATC evaluation? If you have it for long term, you grant it, or do you send it still nevertheless to planning to do any kind of additional evaluations if you had the ATC?
If we had it, we would just go ahead and prepare the service agreement for the customer and move to an executable service agreement. They wouldn't need to do all the study work if we had any.
And in your experience, recognizing that it's a manual evaluation process, as you noted, how long does it usually take to evaluate that? Again, absent needing an upgrade or absent needing a study, if there is ATC, how long does it take you to, I guess, evaluate it and determine whether you have ATC or not, and whether you need to send it over to planning for additional studies? Is that like a multi-day, multi-week process, or a bit earlier, quicker than that?
Yeah, so the ODE actually outlines timelines that the transmission service provider has to act on things. I think, and I'm stretching way back my memory here, I think we have 30 days basically to do some kind of action on it, whether it's offer you a study or offer you the service agreement. So we have up to 30 days to deal with that. So it really is going to depend on, how many requests come in at the same time, the staffing we've got, different things like that. We try to act on them as quickly as we can to get them moving through the queue, but we do have, I believe it's 30 days to do some kind of action.
Okay. No, thanks for that.
Yeah.
I'll ask one more since I don't see any other hands up. Let me just double check. Christina, do we have any hands up yet?
I don't see any yet, Milos, okay. Or any chat.
Okay, so just moving now to short-term service, less than a year in duration, and that's the monthly, weekly, daily that you talked about. You noted that that's automated, or you have an automated process where you have a number of validations that you evaluate that request for service. I presume it's also queue-based process, first come, first served, automated evaluation, and if so, how long does that evaluation take? Even though it's automated, is that a day? Is that less than a day? Is that instantaneous?
Yeah, it's fairly quickly. Usually, unless somebody floods the queue with a whole bunch of requests, it's seconds, quite honestly, usually under a minute from the time it hits our system, it runs through the validation. I will say that, we release our firm to non-firm at 12 o'clock PPT, and when that happens, depending on the season and the day, sometimes our queue can get really bogged down with hundreds of requests, and the processing can get a little bogged down. The other thing that can happen and bog it down is if there's competition, preemption and competition that's going on for all of those requests. So that can delay the processing, but even that is kind of all automated, and so the system is just working through. We do monitor it. We have, a desk in our control room 24/7 that is watching that queue to make sure things are processing in a reasonable time. But even, those kind of requests, have an amount of time that's outlined for us to process them. And those timing requirements are actually outlined in NASB. We might also have those kind of processing deadlines in our business practices. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've had to do the business practices. But for the most part, they're fairly instantaneous. They're just within a few seconds, or a minute or so, unless, again, the queue is really bogged down by a whole bunch of non-firm requests looking for the similar capacity. Preemption competition kicks off, or any of those factors. But it's usually pretty quickly.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you for that. And since I don't see other questions, maybe let me ask one more, and this is really going to be, I think, my last question. But you touched on something that maybe we can tease out just a little bit more for the benefit of everybody. When you mentioned, I think you said maybe 12 p.m. or midnight, maybe 12 midnight, you release.
Yeah, it's actually noon.
Okay, noon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, noon. You release firm transmission as non-firm, and I presume what that means is
unscheduled firm.
Okay, unscheduled firm. Yeah, unscheduled firm. You release it as non-firm, meaning that it increases the amount of non-firm capacity or ATC that you have available for sale. But even though that release occurs, that firm rights holder can come in, in real time and still utilize their firm transmission rights. It just may mean that, if you've sold too much non-firm now, you may have to potentially curtail some non-firm. But, that firm rights holder, even though the unscheduled firm is released as non-firm, they can still come and utilize it, and it may lead to some potential non-firm curtailments. Is that how it works?
Yes, correct. Yeah, the firm right holder never loses their right to be able to schedule that. Just because they don't schedule it in the day ahead doesn't mean they don't have the right up until, the scheduling deadlines outlined in the oath to do that. And we will curtail if we need to, and it goes on priority. So, non-firm within their different buckets go first.
Okay, very helpful. Okay, I'll pause here. I think we have maybe built up a queue now, so let's see if we have anybody else that's raised a hand.
Yep, thank you. So you can go to the person with the hand raised. If you could just please introduce yourself first so the group knows who's speaking.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Steve Greenlee, Brookfield. Since nobody jumped in, I thought I'd ask a couple. Just with respect to processing requests, it really is available, ATC driven.
Mm-hmm.
I'm presuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's no kind of contract validation.
Correct. The only contract validation that we do is to make sure they're a valid customer. But, they can't put in a request if they're not a valid customer. So that's really all that there is there for us.
Yeah, can you briefly touch on eligible customer? And part of it just relates to some of the EDAM discussions. And I don't know if it was you or one of the other transmission providers mentioned, for example, the CAISO would not be a eligible customer.
Yeah.
So
the tariff defines eligible customer, and then they define kind of transmission customer. And so an eligible customer is any customer. But if you really want to do transmission business, you have to become a true transmission customer. And what that involves is there's credit criteria that you have to meet. You have to sign, for Idaho Power at least, you have to sign some service agreements that are kind of blanket agreements. So they give you, that you're agreeing to the terms of the tariff, that you're agreeing to pay us, those kind of things. So we'll have a customer, when they sign up to be a transmission customer, sign both short-term firm and non-firm agreements. We also make them sign resale agreements, so if they wanted to purchase Idaho Power transmission from another customer, we don't have to try to chase down paperwork when they're trying to do that deal. So we have some standard OAT agreements that people just execute that we just call blanket agreements. And then once the credit is approved by our credit department, we'll set you up with a credit limit and the ability to do transmission service. And then you can put in requests. But if you haven't gone through that credit approval process and been officially set up, you can still see ATC if you have a digital certificate. You just can't really put in a request.
Understood. Okay, thanks. And then one second question, and I hope this makes sense, but I'm just trying to think of kind of the queue order and the processing. You could be faced with a circumstance where somebody higher in the queue order has a request in that's later than somebody lower in the queue, but they want the transmission earlier. And just as far as sequencing, obviously maybe you're still in the process of studying that first higher queued customer with a later start date, and just how that works as far as, do you give the lower ranked customer service, obviously for sure, up until that higher ranked one would begin service? I hope that makes sense. I'm just trying to figure out how that works.
Let me see if I can see if I understand what you're asking me. Are you talking within the firm realm or the non-firm?
No, let's stay with the firm realm.
Okay. We could have a daily firm, let's say we have a monthly firm that's kind of sitting out there waiting for us to finish its validation and move it forward. And we have a daily firm or a weekly firm that gets automatically approved. Because that monthly firm, if that monthly firm is already in the queue, right, then they're going to still hold their place, and we'll deal with the others that got automatically granted. It gets a little messy, but we will deal with it. If, for instance, a monthly comes in and a daily's already been granted capacity in the monthly ones, then it can kick off the competition. And we call it preemption and competition. And it's outlined in the tariff where, one's they could have matching rights, so they've got to come in and match it or not. It gets a little complicated. But there's a whole business practice that talks about preemption competition if there's somebody that wants the same capacity. If that's what you're asking. I'm not sure if that's really what you're asking or not.
Well, I think it is. I think it really goes to the heart of the issue. I was just, clearly if those people on daily who don't commit to the longer term, I guess they do so with the understanding that, that may be available on a day-to-day basis, but there could be diminished capacity available at some point in the future when the monthly or annual kick in. So anyway, and that's the risk they take by not signing up for the longer term. So I get it. Okay, I'll take a look at your business practices. Okay. Thank you.
All right, let's see if anybody else has a question before we go to Stephen. All right, Bonnie, go ahead.
Hi, this is Bonnie Blair. I represent the Six Cities Group. A question about the payment arrangements. Are reservations paid for when granted, or when requested, or when and if used?
They start, so if granted, so if you have a reservation and we grant it and we say, yep, you can have that service, so when it starts, you start paying, whether you use it or not. So if you have a service that starts January 1st of 2023, and we say, yep, you can have that yearly service, and we sign all the service agreements, then January 1st, 2023, you start having to pay for that reservation, whether you use it or not.
Okay, and you pay for the entire term?
We bill it on a monthly basis, but you are locked in for the entire term. We don't let people out of those yearly requests. So if you commit to a year, you're going to pay a whole year, whether you use it or not.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but we don't make you pay like all year long. Like in January, we'll let you pay over 12 months.
Okay, got it.
You do have to put in a deposit, though. I mean, that's in the tariff as well. So deposits are required on yearly.
Okay. Great. Okay, I think I have it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Bonnie. Milos, go ahead.
Yeah, and Bonnie, just for the question for me, maybe Kathy, and if you don't know it, that's okay. We can follow up offline. But along the rate discussion, just for the different types of products that you have, and maybe focusing just on point to point for a second. You have long term, and then you have short term of different durations. If you're familiar with it, are they all the same rate for that firm service versus non-firm, or do you have a different rate depending on duration? I'm not sure how Idaho has the rate structured, but if you're familiar with this, does long-term firm pay the same rate as daily firm, and does non-firm pay the same rate as firm?
Yeah, so our rates are outlined according to a formula rate, and they change every October. And so there is a different calculated rate, for yearly, for monthly, for weekly, for, based on firm. And then we also have an established rate for non-firm. When you're talking monthly and weekly, quite honestly, it's the same rate, whether it's firm or non-firm, based on our formula rate that's approved at FERC. And daily is where you get a little bit different, right? Because for daily, we have a heavy load, or Monday through Saturday kind of daily, and then we have a Sunday and WEC holiday kind of daily rate, which is a kind of light load. So all of those actually also are on our OASIS site. So if you go to OASIS and you look at there's a folder called ITCO transmission rates. You can see what our current, there's a PDF that shows our current rates, as well as a little bit of history of what the rate has looked like. And there's also Excel spreadsheets that show how the rate's calculated according to our tariff. And every year we go in, I think it's usually around June, with our informational filing to FERC in order to change the rate effective October 1st. So they all have a different rate, but they're all based on the same methodology.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I don't see anybody else in the queue. So thank you very much, Kathy. Next we have Stephen Longmire. Yeah, he's going to share practices on their study process and transmission upgrades. So Stephen, I'll go ahead and pull up your presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Longmire, and I'm an engineer in Idaho Power's System Planning Department. And I work on the system impact study side of things for these transmission service requests. So my presentation today is also relatively short, but it will go over Idaho Power's study process and identifying upgrades for these long-term transmission service requests. So the process for requesting a study is really outlined, as Kathy mentioned, in our open access transmission tariff and in our business practices. So for point-to-point requests, those can be found in OAT sections 19.1 and 19.2. And then we also have business practice number 4, goes into a little more detail on that process. And then for network requests, that's in OAT section 32.1 and 32.2, and business practice number 2. So that's really where all of the details can be found. Essentially, a customer will submit a request through our OASIS site, and for long-term, they will choose a TSR type of yearly, choose a point of receipt and a point of delivery, POR and a POD, and specify the length and dates of service that they are requesting, and they'll need to provide a flat megawatt profile for their request. And we also require a deposit equal to 1 month of service. So at that stage, as Kathy mentioned, the transmission service provider will evaluate the ATC of each segment. Usually for these long-term requests, it will end up needing a system impact study. So if there is a shortage of ATC on one of the segments between the PR and POD, if you remember the map that Kathy showed, that is kind of the segments I'm talking about. And if there is that need for the study, then we will tender a system impact study agreement to the customer. So if there are multiple requests that are in the same geographic region or that we know will interact with each other in a clustered way, then we do allow customers to do a cluster study if all customers agree on terms. In my time doing these studies, I haven't done any cluster studies yet. We haven't received any of those requests, so I personally don't have experience with these cluster studies, but that is an option for customers. Next slide, please. So the system impact study procedures that we use once it does go to the SIS phase, those can also be found in the OAT in 19.3 for point-to-point studies and 32.3 for network studies. customer in the agreement that they sign. Generally, a deposit is provided, and then any differences over or under after the study is fully complete and the cost is calculated, that will be rectified after the study is done. And then per the OAT, the system impact study will identify, they always identify system constraints and required upgrades for direct assigned facilities. And if the customer requests, we will identify redispatch options. And for point-to-point customers, they can request conditional curtailment options, and we'll provide the number of hours and system conditions of that curtailment. And that CF is not available for network service. Slide, please. So in order to identify the actual upgrades and facilities that would be required to firm up the service, we do power flow studies. At Idaho Power, we use Power World, and we'll begin with WEC base cases based on the year and the season, and then we'll stress up relevant WEC paths or internal paths up to the new TTC that would be required for however much capacity is being requested. And we'll run through our full contingency analysis on our models. All of the results of that need to meet NERC TPL 001 requirements, all of those standards. So any violations that we find that violate those tables in that NERC standard, we'll need to rectify that. So using engineering judgment and the history that we know of the system, we'll try to determine the least cost upgrade options. That could be line reconductors, a new line, new switch yards, series compensation, anything along those lines or others. And we'll model those once we have an option. We'll model that in our case with the same stress levels, and then we'll verify those upgrades through contingency analysis. And once we have a model with a set of upgrades that eliminate all of the violations, then we'll get a cost estimate and write up a report, system impact study report, to send to the customer with those costs and upgrade options. So then if the customer wants to go forward, just the last bullet there, the customer wants to go forward with these upgrades, we will tender a facility study agreement that they will need to sign. So then proceeding with upgrades, again, in OAT 19.4 for point-to-point and 32.4 for network requests, that kind of outlines the phase into the facility study process. The customer will need to sign that FSA, and then for the OAT, that facility study will include an estimate of the cost of direct assignment facilities, which the customer will pay for, and then the customer's share of the cost of network upgrades. And then that study will also provide an estimate of the time required to complete that construction. And then the customer is required to provide a form of security equivalent to the cost of the new facilities and upgrades that we've identified. And then once that facility study is complete, the customer will need to move forward with all of those upgrades identified. They will need to execute a service agreement with us. Slide. So the rights of the entity that proceeds with upgrades, I found these in the OAT. Point-to-point customers have the option of using planning redispatch for conditional firm service as temporary service until upgrades are constructed. And those details are in the OAT 19.7. In 23.1, it mentions that point-to-point customers may sell, assign, or transfer their rights to another eligible customer. And then network customers only can participate in the energy imbalance market, outlined in OAT 28.7. And then for all customers, once those upgrades have been constructed and completed, they're in service, then the customer gains that firm service that they had initially requested through through us. So I think that's my last slide, pretty short. So I guess I'll take questions now.
Okay. I do see Milos has his hand raised, but again, just a reminder to select the little hand icon above the chat window if you're in WebEx, or if you're on the phone, press #2. So while we're waiting for people to queue up, you want to go ahead? Well, actually, I see Robert. Let's go ahead and give Robert a chance to ask questions. Robert Sparks. Robert, you'll just need to unmute yourself.
Hi, it's Robert Sparks, California ISO. My question's a little bit tangential. I had a question about the direct assignment facilities in relation to a transmission service request. I couldn't imagine how a direct assignment facility would actually be related to a network transmission or for a transmission service request. Can you elaborate on that one a little bit?
I have not done a study where we found direct assignment facilities. I believe I pulled that wording out of the OAT, so I can't think of one either. I'm sorry, I don't know if I have Eric on the call here too, or if Kathy can think of anything, but I'm not sure on that one. I haven't found a study that had any direct assignment costs for a transmission service agreement.
Yeah, I couldn't think of one either, so it sounds like maybe that's not related, but not sure. But anyway, thank you. That was that just jumped out at me.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to Lacey next, and then I think Milos also had his hand raised. So Lacey, go ahead.
Thanks. This is Lacey from BPA, and I had just a couple quick questions. When on your power flow study slide, you had a bullet that said relevant paths are stressed up to the new TTC required for the request. How do you identify the new TTC required?
So essentially, for example, if there's a request that passes through Idaho Northwest, Path 14, west to east, we know that the TTC is 1,200 megawatts. So if the request is for 100 megawatts, we will stress it up to 1,300 and then run our contingency analysis. So basically, we need to add 100 megawatts to that past TTC to firm up all 100, because we have, well, that's assuming that in the summer months, we're fully subscribed on that path. So there's 0 megawatts of ATC. So we'll need to add a full 100 in that example.
So for the most part, like most of your paths are just like a one-to-one. You're able to identify that whatever megawatt amount the request is probably going to have precisely that amount of impact on the path you're studying?
Yeah, so far the constrained paths, I would say the vast majority have been Path 14 west to east in my experience. And so that is a direct one-to-one. So that's been my experience, is the highly constrained paths do have that one-to-one nature.
Nice. Okay. And then my other question, just out of curiosity, because BPA, we use a lot more conditional firm as a bridge to get customer service until the upgrades are constructed, but I was just wondering how common, if at all, planning redispatch has been in your experience.
Yeah, in my experience, I have not had any planning redispatch option. We get conditional firm as an option that the customer chooses quite frequently, almost every time, I would say. Not every single time, but very frequently. But the planning redispatch, I have not actually had to do one of those studies because they have not requested that.
So this is Kathy. Let me jump in just real quick on here. On planning redispatch, usually the major constraints that we hit for Idaho Power is before we even hit any of our internal generation. And so when you're trying to import to Idaho Power, if I've got no generation that's going to relieve anything, then planning redispatch isn't a whole lot of help right there. So that's kind of why usually people are looking at that import capability on that Path 14, which is the connections with Bonneville, Avista, and Pacificorp. And there's no generation until you kind of get internal generation until you get past that. So it's not going to help them out to redispatch anything.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, we don't have planning redispatch for very similar reasons. You know, we're not getting a lot of relief on the path that we need if we try to redispatch something. So conditional firm is definitely a better path forward for the vast, vast majority of people. That's all my questions, though. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll go to Tyrone next.
Hi, this is Tyrone from PG&E. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. My question is, I wanted to confirm or to see if you could elaborate exactly on what was meant by a flat megawatt profile with a request for a study.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
Basically they, in the request, they choose 1 megawatt amount, and then that will be the same request or service that we would provide in every month of that request. They can't choose like 50 megawatts in January and then 100 megawatts in February. I believe that's what that means.
Got it. And so you're evaluating that single output value across multiple seasons.
Yeah. Yeah. So if it's for the long-term yearly service, we would look at that full request that they've made, say it's 100 megawatts in every month of the request that they've made. So yeah, that'll go through all seasons. Okay.
All right. That's helpful. And then you mentioned it as it relates to the seasons, and you described taking the WCC base cases. Are you modifying the loads based on any additional updates for your areas? Excuse me.
We do. We'll take the worst case scenario. So, for example, like a heavy summer in most cases, and then we will verify. We'll take the wet base case and verify that all projects, because as you may know, the wet base cases may not be totally perfect every time. So we will verify that any projects that we know are coming online have been modeled correctly, and that the loads are correct based on our forecasts and everything.
Okay. And then in terms of the updates for I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. When you update the load forecast, are you looking at 1 in 5, 1 in 2, 1 in 10 in terms of that update?
I'm not sure what our load forecasting team uses.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to make a guess at it, but I get that data from another group.
Understood. Okay. All right. And then the other question that I had was related to the actual request. If you have a request that's submitted for point to point, as you've described, can an entity request point to point through multiple point to points, and do they also have to be specific with the resource that they are looking for point to point transmission?
So the first question was, can they request like multiple point-to-point, multiple PORs and PODs?
Yes.
I think they need to submit a different request into the queue for each POR and POD. I believe that's the case. And as far as having, okay, yeah, I'll copy confirm that. And then the second question, I'm not actually 100% sure if they need to have like for point-to-point, I don't know if they need to have a designated resource.
Yeah, so let me take this one for you, Kathy.
Okay.
Yeah, so a point-to-point is just that, right? You have the right to inject at one point in my system and take it out at another. So you have to tell me the specific POR, POD combination you want to do that at. If you want multiples, it's going to be multiple requests. And as far as the resource, for a point-to-point, because Idaho does not use a flow-based system, of looking at its requests, then no, you don't need to tell me the actual physical resource that you want if you're just using point-to-point service.
All right, that's really helpful. I guess my one follow-up question, and then I think I'm done, is what I believe I heard you describe earlier, Stephen, was a serial process. So if you have someone that's submitting multiple requests, let's just say, and technically it's coming from that same resource, but when you're looking at it in a serial process, are you looking at the simultaneous flows across each of your paths or the non-simultaneous?
We look at the simultaneous. So we model for any senior requests if you have the same path, we will assume that they are on that path.
Okay. All right, great. Hey, thanks, Stephen. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Kathy.
All right, thanks, Tyrone. We'll go ahead and go to Milos.
All right. Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate all the responses and you walking us through this. I just have a couple of questions that I think hopefully are helpful for others as well. So it sounds like this process that you walked us through is triggered in response to long-term requests. I think as you have it here is yearly, 1 year or longer. And if there's no ATC, like Kathy said before, then it comes to you and you study it, assuming that the party wants to continue and essentially pay for different studies. You would study it to identify potential upgrades that may be needed, and if they want to proceed with an upgrade, that has its own processes that we'll touch on. But this study process, I want to just confirm, it's triggered for those requests that are 1 year or longer in duration. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And is there a particular threshold? Because as you probably know, some of these upgrades, depending on the nature of the upgrade, they may take multiple years to develop and to grant that service. Is there some kind of would you build for a 1 year request, I guess, if it's far enough in the future, or if maybe they were looking to defer service, you would still allow for that option that you would proceed with an upgrade, even though they may be just seeking 1 year of service?
Yeah. They're the minimum time for that to trigger an upgrade is 1 year. So any long-term transmission service request, if the customer wishes to proceed with the upgrades, we would do those upgrades. Okay.
No, very helpful. Yeah, I'm just trying to contrast it with, we've also done some benchmarking with some of the other ISOs, RTOs that have similar products, and some of them, I think most of them do what you noted, but I think I can't remember which one. They would only, build if the request was 5 years or longer or had renewal rights. They wouldn't build for a 1 year request. It's good to just to contrast. And it sounds like also, and it sounds like in your process as well, you are not doing cluster studies, even though it sounds like that's an option. You maybe have not been taken up on it. So all the studies that you primarily do then are individual study requests, so that particular entity that submitted the request is the only one pursuing the studies and potentially, being responsible for the upgrade or for the cost associated with the upgrade.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, there is that option, but we haven't been taken up on that yet. So everything is for that each individual customer study for them.
Okay. To what extent in your study processes now, let's assume the party or the entities want to pursue an upgrade, and you're going through your different studies, the feasibility study, the system impact study, and any other studies that you may need to do. To what extent in any of those studies do you take into account any kind of generator interconnection requests that may be still in the interconnection process? Do you account for those in any way, or would it be only generators that are that have a transmission service, essentially reservation, or have the transmission service with it that you would take into account? Do any of those generator interconnection requests that are in the process play any role in your study assumptions?
So no, we don't model generators from the generation interconnection queue unless they also have a transmission service request already in the queue. So yeah, those queues are separate. And then when a GI seeking point-to-point gets far enough along, they would enter our TSR queue to get that transmission service. And then once they are in our TSR queue, then we would take them into consideration for our TSR studies.
Okay. Along those similar lines, then, when let's assume you have a firm point-to-point long-term request that needs studies, and because there's no ATCs here studying to determine if they need an upgrade, and let's say an upgrade need is identified, do you in any ways look at sizing that upgrade to also account for potential other reliability needs, so that that request can be that upgrade that you identified in response to that individual request can be sized, and if there's a reliability component to it that you could take advantage of, that project that is sized to account for that reliability need as well. So it's not just necessarily one request driving the upgrade, but you've identified a reliability need, and so you're sizing the upgrade that this upgrade can meet both needs, the reliability need plus that one request. Does that happen as well, that you're looking at other needs that the upgrade can meet, and if necessary or if possible, and you're sizing that project appropriately? Does that come into play throughout the process anywhere?
Yeah, we actually have in the past on a few of our studies, we'll identify an upgrade and it will say provide double or more of the capacity that we actually need, but it's the upgrade that makes the most sense, most economical. So in that case, we would then we have charged the customer, or by charge I mean the cost estimate we give them on the report is some percentage, like 40% of the cost of constructing that new upgrade, and then we would then use that capacity, like you said, for reliability needs or for load service or another request on the same path. It's not something that we actively. It's not like a real active part of our process where we do a deep dive into every possible option we could have for reliability. But if it comes up in our studies that says, oh, it makes sense to do this build, but that provides us with a lot more than they need, then we would do a proportional cost for the customer.
Okay. So thank you. And let me now just switch my questions a little bit now to the financial component of this and get a better sense of how this works financially. Let's say again, you are going through your it's a individual study, an upgrade is needed, and now you get to the system impact study or whichever stage that you put essentially in front of that customer the nature of the study and the costs associated with it. Does that entity that's driving the upgrade, how are they funding the upgrade? Is Idaho Power, funding it, or does that point-to-point customer in this example responsible for, paying some of a portion or all of those costs up front, and then do they get are they reimbursed over time in return for credits or anything else? How does that financial component to the upgrade work?
So my understanding for and Kathy maybe can correct me if I'm wrong, but for transmission service requests for those network upgrades, the transmission provider actually funds the construction, but the customer is required to provide the full security, so that just in case they pull out of the agreement, which is a little different than our generation interconnection queue, where it's reimbursed with transmission credits. That's my understanding of how the funding works for those network upgrades.
Yeah, Milos, that's actually outlined in the tariff as well. I think the tariff allows for either them to fund it and get transmission point-to-point, them to fund it and get transmission credit, or Idaho Power just to fund it and build it. And then, of course, then it goes into the transmission assets at that point in time once it's built. So that's actually in the tariff. I'd have to refresh myself on exactly that, but if I recall, it's it's up to the transmission service provider on what they want that to do. But if for some reason the transmission point-to-point customer funds it, they do get transmission credits back.
Okay. They get it back over time. Yeah. Okay, I see. As they take service.
Yeah, with interest.
Okay. And then one last question, I promise. Maybe this one is more, well, I guess either for you. Just at what point does Idaho Power provide rights of first refusal or renewal rights? Is it 5 years of service, or is it some other time frame?
That one I'm not sure on.
Yeah, rollover comes with 5 years or longer.
Okay. Well, I think those are all the questions I had. I don't know, Christina, if there are others in the queue that may have questions.
Adam, can you check to see if anybody on the phone has any questions? I know I'm not able to see them otherwise.
We do not have any questions in the
phone.
Questions?
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, I don't see anybody else in the queue. Any final words for Stephen, or any questions, final words for Stephen or Kathy?
This is Milos. Since there are no questions, just wanted to again thank you, Kathy and Stephen, on behalf of the ISO for really taking the time to walk us through this, putting together the presentation and answering our questions. I think this is very helpful. And, as we stated at the beginning for the stakeholders, on Friday, I think on the 4th, we'll have SRP share their practices. And I think hopefully you found this helpful, shaping our understanding of the duration in particular of transmission service that parties can reserve across other systems around the ISO, and some of the qualities associated with it. I think we also touched and had a good discussion on the process for upgrading transmission and what that looks like, what the need is and what the trigger for those upgrades is, how they take into account certain assumptions in those studies, and then some of the financial elements. I think these are all elements that we'll need to grapple with. And these are hopefully my line of questioning is illuminating some of the key areas that the ISO is looking at. It's that duration of transmission service, the process as well for reserving that transmission service that will be important to us when we're crafting a framework where wheel-throughs reserve that transmission in advance to establish scheduling priorities. So really appreciate it, Kathy and Stephen, for taking your time and sharing with us your practices, and for everybody that had questions today, really appreciate it. Christina, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Milos. And just a heads up, we did post the presentations that Stephen and Kathy went over today out on the initiative webpage. It's in with the phase 2 item, so look for it there. And again, we have another meeting this coming Friday, as Milos mentioned, where SRP is going to share their practices. That meeting's from 9 to 11. The participation details can be found on ISO's public calendar, and then we did schedule another meeting just recently, so the details aren't out there yet, but they should be soon on February 14th, where Vistas is planning to present a proposal. So thank you again very much to Idaho Power for your presentation, sharing your practices. We greatly appreciate it, and we really appreciate all the participation in these working groups. So thank you, and have a good rest of your day.